Hi, in this tutorial we are going to get started with a new language, Python, and we're going to be using a new environment called Replit. So to get going, you can Google Replit, R-E-P-L-I-T, and that'll take you to a site called replit.com, which you'll see here. In the upper right, usually you'll be asked to sign in or create an account, so you may need to create a new account if you don't already have one, in order for you to save your projects. But once you've created your account, this is the home page. When I want to create a new REPL, you're going to click the new REPL button. Down here, My REPLs is going to give you a bank of all the projects that you've previously created. It's going to store them all there. So I'm going to start by clicking New REPL. I need to pick the language that I'm working in. In my case, it's going to be Python. And then I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this Basics Tutorial. And I can go ahead and just click Create REPL. So once it creates it, you will see a screen similar to mine come up. On the right is where our console, where we're going to see our output and input and such. On the left would be our list of files. If we had more than one, we're only going to have one for right now. And in the middle section is where we're actually going to write our code. So our code's going to start with basically a main method where we write everything that we're doing. So we're going to say def main with empty parentheses and a colon, and that's got to be typed that way no matter what. You can't change it up, you can't forget the parentheses. Any of those things are going to cause an error. The other thing that's special about Python is indentation is important. It tells the compiler kind of what code goes with what. So in this case, def main is going to be the outermost indented code. Replit actually automatically indents, but let's say it didn't and my cursor was there. I would need to indent one tab over to do the next part of my code. So the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is just do basic output. How do I have something show up? Now I'm going to put a comment here. Comments are started with a hashtag, and I'm just going to say this is basic output. So to do basic output, I'm going to use the keyword print. Then I'm going to create a set of parentheses, and then inside of it, I'm going to tell it what I want it to print. So, for example, if I wanted to print, this is my first program, my first Python program. I'm going to go ahead and put that in quotes inside my print statement, and that will then, if I go to run it, I'm going to go ahead and, before I run it, I got to fix one thing. With my main method, it starts with def main and it needs to end. It has to have an ending point, or when you go to run it, it won't do anything. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter after my print statement, and I'm going to type in the term main with empty parentheses. Now, the problem right now is that the indentation level needs to be the same as def main to show that that's kind of the end of that. So I'm going to go ahead and backspace that. So notice that def main and main are at the exact same indentation. And then any code that we want to write for it to run is going to go inside of that. So now when I run this, you're going to see that this actually outputs, this is my first Python program. So printing can be done that way all the time. So now the next thing would be basic input. And when I go to do basic input, I'm going to use the input command. Now, anytime I do input, I need to basically it needs somewhere to store it. So I'm going to need to create a variable. So when I go to create my variable, for this one, I'm going to have it be name. I'm going to ask them for their name. So I'm going to say name equals input. And then I'm going to say enter your name. So input is telling the computer that it's going to be taking in a value from the user. The stuff in the parentheses here is always going to be what is the prompt? What do you want to tell the user to do? So if I don't put anything in there, then the user is not going to know what I want them to type. And then just to kind of test and make sure that works, I'm going to say print name plus is a cool name. So now notice that my print statement, if I want to ever combine a variable with stuff in quotes, I'm going to do that with a plus sign, just like you do in many other languages. So name is the variable that's going to be used to store whatever name they enter. And then I'm going to go ahead and reprint that. So let's run it and test it again. It says this is my first Python program. It asked me to enter my name. So I'm going to enter the name Lucy. And then when I click that, it says Lucy is a cool name. Okay, so it's whatever's getting stored for what they typed in, it's going to reprint that. So if I run it again, I type a different name this time. If I type in Brock, it's going to then print Brock as a cool name. So that's basic input and output. So before we talk about working with numbers, we need to talk a little bit about variable types. So the variable type string basically allows you to bring in words, sentences, or numbers that you're not going to do math with. The variable type int is short for integer, which would be -1, -2, 100, anything without a decimal. And then the other variable type is float, and that's basically a decimal. And the problem with Python is every time you do one of these input statements, it's always going to bring it in as a string. And sometimes we want to do math with it. So if that's the case, we're going to have to actually convert it to the other type before we do math. So for example, if I say x equals input, enter a number, and then let's say I also say y equals input, enter a number. And then if I wanted to say, for example, sum equals x plus y, and then I want to print that. Now, let's just test it out and see what happens. I'm going to enter my name Brock real quick. Then I'm going to enter a number. So I'm going to enter in 12, and then my second number is going to be 5, and you're going to see it prints 125, which 12 plus 5 definitely isn't 125, so that doesn't make sense. And what's happening here is Python is reading those both in as a string, so it's saying take the string 12 and the string 5 and join them, in which case we actually don't want them to do that, we want it to do math. So in order to do math, up here when I bring x in, I need to convert it to a number type. So if I want it to just be an integer, I would type the word int here, and then in parentheses, I'm going to put everything that I want to turn into an integer. So I want to turn whatever they input into an integer. So notice that I put a parenthesis around this whole input statement. I'm going to do the same thing with y. And now when I run it, type in a name, my first number 12, my next number 5, and now notice that it's actually doing the addition math, because instead of those being string, they're numbers. I can do the same thing with a float. So instead of using the word int here, I'm going to do the same thing with a float now. So let's do another one. Let's say z equals, and I want this one to turn into a decimal. So I'm going to say float and then input, enter a decimal number. And then if I want to be able to do math with it, let's say I'm going to say mult equals z times 5. I'm just going to, or 3. I'm just going to pick some sort of math to do. And then I'm going to go ahead and print this. So I'm going to say the result is, and then plus mult. So that should give me the result of me multiplying, but we're going to have a little problem here. So everything here is entering my number 12 and 5, 17. Now it's asking for a decimal. So if I say, for example, 2.5, now it's throwing an error on me. The reason I'm getting an error is because just like I have to convert to numbers to do math, unfortunately when I print, it won't combine numbers with words. not okay with that. So mult, since mult is a number, that's what it's yelling at me for. I actually need to convert that back to a string. So I'm going to put an str in front of it so that it converts that back to a string, and then it should print it. So one last test through here. If I do 12, 5, now if I do 2.5, and it's saying the result is 7.5 because 2.5 times 3 is 7.5. So that's just some basics, input and output, and a little bit of math with Python. And in the next tutorial, we'll talk a little bit about the math class.